Father in heaven, we just thank you that we can come before you again this evening. We thank you for the Word of God. We thank you for the many blessings you bring into our lives. We thank you that we can know for surety that our names are written in the book of life because of the blood of Christ. Thank you that we have a mediator that mediates on our behalf, truly the Son of Man, made of the seed of Abraham, truly God as the Son of God, and therefore able to mediate for us to you, Father. And so we just pray now that you would open our minds, open our hearts as we open the Word of God, and that you would teach us from the book of Daniel. I thank you in Jesus' name. I want to go to Daniel chapter 8. Daniel 8 is very important. Great controversy, page 425. 425, if it's not, it's 409. I think it's 425. Central pillar and foundation of our faith is, you know the rest of the quote? The declaration, under 2,300 days, then shall the sanctuary be cleansed. Central pillar and foundation of our faith. So the verses leading up to, and that of course is Daniel 8:14, the verses leading up to that are pretty important for us to understand. And beginning, this is Daniel in the third year of the reign of King Belshazzar, verse 1. Belshazzar being, who is
the
nephew of Nebuchadnezzar? Nebuchadnezzar.
I know it says son, but it's grandson.
It's his grandson, wasn't it? Yeah. And he was made co-regent.
Yeah, with his father.
With his father. That's why he said to Daniel, I'll make you third in the kingdom, because he couldn't make him second, because he was the second. And then he has this vision, and we see in verse 3, then I lifted up mine eyes and saw, and behold, there stood before the river a ram which had two horns, and the two horns were high, but one was higher than the other. I saw the ram pushing, and it talks about westward, northward, southward, and then it talks in verse 5 about the he-goat, and it came near to the ram. Now we don't have to be any doubt about who the ram and the he-goat are, do we?
No, it's explained.
Which verse explains for us?
There's
21?
21.
21?
Yeah.
Gabriel tells Daniel who this is. The ram which thou sawest, having two horns, are the kings of Media and Persia. So, and the rough goat is the king of Grecia, and the great horn between his eyes is the first king. And who was the first king of Greece in this context?
Alexander
the Great. So this is the language. So when we see in verse 6, and he came to the ram that had the two horns, that's the he-goat, which I had seen stand before the river, and ran unto him in the fury of his power. And I saw him come close unto the ram, and he was moved with choler against him, and smote the ram, and brake his two horns, and there was no power in the ram to stand before him, etc. So he breaks him, and this is when Alexander particularly met with the armies of Darius, I think it was, and in 330 BC, Battle of Arbela, is that right? I can't remember. Something like that. Anyway, they had a battle. That's we can get the detail. I'm sure that Uriah Smith will tell us exactly what it was. And then it's so this goat in verse 8, he waxed very great, and when he was strong, the great horn was broken. Poor old Alexander.
Yes, died. Now he is.
Died, and all his generals came to him and said, "Who's going to be the one to take over?" And he said, "The strongest." Well, that certainly set the cat among the pigeons, and there was 31 generals, which quickly dissolved to 4, and eventually to 2. The Seleucids and the Ptolemies And so, the verse 8. Eddie, can you read that? 8:8?
8:8. Therefore the he-goat waxed very great, and when he was strong, a great horn was broken, and from it came 4 notable ones towards the 4 winds of the heaven.
So the kingdom was broken up into 4 parts, which was originally Cassander, Seleucus, Ptolemy, and who was the other one? I should know. I can't remember the 4th one. Anyway, there was another guy. And it says in verse 9, Fiona.
And out of one of them came forth a little horn, which waxed exceeding great toward the south and toward the east and toward the pleasant land.
And there is some conjecture about when it says out of one of them. What is the them referring to?
All the 4
The
noble
4
ones.
winds or the 4 horns.
Yeah,
The
it's
4
it.
winds.
4 winds or the 4 horns. There's some
Yeah.
dispute over.
Yes, there's a dispute because there is some conjecture saying, well, Rome didn't come out of Greece. Rome came from a separate on the Italian peninsula, or it didn't come out of one of these horns. And so it has to be out of one of the 4 winds, as it has just come from another location and it's come in and it's taken over. But a man by the name of F.L. Sharp, who wrote the book called Antiochus or Rome, I think it was him who did a very good case study showing how that it was Greeks, there was some Greeks who came into the Italian peninsula and took over it, and they then became the foundation of this dominant Roman force coming out of Rome. They were actually Greeks who had migrated over and conquered that territory. And so out of one of them, out of one of those horn powers, came forth this Roman power. So if that information is correct, then I think, as we all read it naturally in the beginning, when it said out of one of them, that we should read out of one of the 4 horns. And if we can do that, we can also be at peace with our forefathers who all believed this. And why should we disagree with them if we don't have to?
True.
Even over little things. It's reflective of mine, because the nature of man is typically such that if I can believe something different to my parents or my forefathers, I will, because then I can be independent and free and I can be my own thinker and all that kind of stuff.
It seems very almost, I don't know, from the wording that out of one of them the horns came forth another horn. So it almost sort of seems
Yeah.
like,
Connected.
yeah, whereas it seems,
Reading it in the literal rule of interpretation, that seems to be the most
as
obvious.
opposed to a horn out of wings.
There are Hebrew nuances about feminine and masculine usages that would suggest that out of one of the 4 winds is probably more accurate, but the plain reading of the English, and as William Miller was often chastised by scholars of his day, he said, I can read the English well enough. And that might sound a little bit simplistic
And arrogant.
but that doesn't mean he didn't study. I mean, that's by no means. So, out of one of them. So this Rome, this power of Rome, which if we would think about the, and I'm not real good on the drawing, the boot, and then you come across into this the area of Greece, and then you're coming around to Israel, which is down here. What we're saying in verse, out of one of them came a little horn, which waxed exceeding great towards what?
The south, the
And toward the
east, and the pleasant
toward the
land.
pleasant land.
So it's moving east.
Yes. South and then east.
So it's moving south,
East.
east,
and then east, and then towards the pleasant land, which is Jerusalem,
yeah.
and that fits with Rome.
Mm.
coming from the east.
From the west.
Sorry, from the west. He's coming from the west, moving to the east. And at verse 10, and it waxed great even to the host of heaven. Who is the host of heaven? This is a really important question here. We need to... It waxed great even to the host of heaven.
Marginal says against the host of heaven, and I've got angels against stars, so host of heaven being,
Maybe Christ.
host, stars being angels, so cast down some of the host of the stars to the ground, which makes me think of Satan then, his angels.
That's a fairly intuitive, natural response.
Not necessarily correct though.
It says in verse 11, he even exalted himself as high as the prince of the host.
So this is where the rules that Miller used become very, very important in terms of how we interpret this. Now, when Joshua, in the book of Joshua, met Christ, and he was introduced as what? Captain of the
Host.
captain of the host. And who was that host?
Michael, Archangel,
That's Michael the Archangel, and he's the captain of the host.
the captain of the angels.
He's the captain of the angels, but also who are the men that are going to be doing fighting with Joshua?
Israel.
It's Israel. It's Israel, and Christ is he's the true leader of Israel. And so there are other verses, and I can't think of the verses offhand, but the host of heaven is referring to God's people. Okay? And I think if we... and notice how it says it cast down some of the host, and when it says it cast down some of the host, can men cast down angels? So you can't literally read that. If you read angels into that passage first, then you can't read that passage literally. If you read it as the host being God's people, then did Rome cast down some of God's people?
Yeah.
Definitely.
Not some, lots.
It took over Jerusalem in the time of the Maccabees in 168 BC. The Jews, of course, they made a league with the Romans because they wanted to break the yoke of the Seleucid power, the Epiphanes, and so they joined with Rome, but that then came back to bite them later on when Rome came in and they took control and they ruled that province through Herod, the Herodians. And it's interesting where it says, cast down some of the host and of the stars to the ground and stamped on them. Now, in terms of the stars and in terms of the sun and the moon, think about the children of Israel. Joseph had a dream, and how were the family described in that dream?
Stars.
Yeah, the parents were the sun and the moon, and the brethren were the stars. And they all made obeisance to Joseph. So there's the stars representing the children of Israel as stars. And Joseph's brethren were their heads, of course. They became the heads of the children of Israel. So it has a specific reference to leadership. To the leadership. So some of the stars were cast to the ground. This is the same in Revelation chapter 12, where, again, when it says the dragon with its tail took a third of the stars. You know, our standard Adventist response to that, that's Satan taking a third of the angels. But that's not the actual meaning of the text. It's an illusion. It's an allusion to that battle, because the battle that's being carried on earth is a carrying on of what took place in heaven in the beginning. You were going to say something? You just got your hand?
No.
So what was the Revelation?
Revelation chapter 12.
Thank you.
So we're talking about symbolism. Who is the dragon in Revelation chapter 12?
This could be Rome.
Rome is what it's talking about, because Satan is working through agencies, and the woman is travailing and in birth, and the great red dragon, having 7 heads and 10 horns, he's wanting to devour the man-child. Well, how did that happen? Through Herod, who wanted to destroy. He destroyed all the babies of Bethlehem. He was seeking to destroy. This is the symbol of the dragon. And some of the leaders of Israel at that time, because it's in verse 4, and his tail drew the third part of the stars of heaven and did cast them to the earth. And the dragon stood forth before the woman, which was ready to be delivered for to devour her child as soon as it was born. See, the context of this passage is the time of Christ's birth. And in that warfare there is an allusion to the war that took place in heaven. There's no doubt about that. And a third of the angels. But in interpreting the passage itself, we have to be very careful that we follow the literal reading of the scripture, and we interpret these symbols accurately, so that we don't get into this newspaper theology of, oh, this equals this, oh, that equals that, and oh, that, I think that's that. We can't do this. We have to make sure that we follow through the symbolism carefully. And so Satan definitely is working, the dragon is working, but he's working through Rome. And he's casting down the leadership of Israel. And that's what we're seeing there in Revelation. So when we come back to Daniel chapter 8. So
Quick question.
Yeah.
Would the interpretation for 8:10 be 8:24?
And his power shall be mighty, but not by his own power.
And he shall strive wonderfully, and shall prosper, and practice and destroy the mighty and the holy people.
Well, that would make sense. The mighty and the holy people. That, that's probably the simplest way to look at it. Just let it interpret itself. That, because he's talking in 21 about Grecia, and then another one stands up. He destroys the holy and the mighty people. So that also is a confirming point on this particular passage. So he stamps on them. And then it says, yea, he magnified himself even to the prince of the host. Now we know that the prince of the host is Christ. Michael, your prince in Daniel 10. Messiah, the prince, is also mentioned. Because this is a negative power, this is a persecuting power that's persecuting God's people. Therefore, the prince of the host that is being magnified against is Christ. Now, what is this referring to when it says he magnified himself to the prince of the host? What event? Is there a specific event or a period of time, or what is this event? This is Rome.
Well, they did crucify him.
Yep. So this is a reference to the crucifixion. Literal rule of interpretation, magnifying himself to be superior to the prince of the host, and that is to take his life, to claim authority. I have power to kill you, I have power to cause you to stay alive, said Pilate. This is Rome magnifying itself to the prince. Are you a king? Yes, I am a king. But my kingdom is not of this world. Pilate knew, he was told that Christ was a king. You said it. So he magnified himself to the prince of the host, and he crucified Christ. And then we get into this interesting verse, and by him the daily was taken away, and the word sacrifice is supplied. The word is continuance, and it says, by him the continuance was taken away, and the place of his sanctuary was cast down. So what, if you're going to be honest with yourself, when you start getting into these passages, the pronouns, what they're referring to, becomes pretty complicated. What, who is what, and so when it says he magnified himself, who is the he?
The little horn.
The little horn. Little horn magnified himself, even to the Prince of Hosts, and by him, by who?
Christ.
No, the little horn.
By him, the little horn, the daily was taken away, and the place of his sanctuary was cast down. Now, what is this talking about? The place of his sanctuary. So the
sanctuary of the little horn.
So sorry, where did the continuance
or the sanctuary of the daily. It's the little horn that this self power that comes out, this little horn power, which is riding the power of the daily, but then puts the daily down and picks up the transgression of desolation.
It's interesting because the taken away is lift up too. That's hard to see in English.
It is. This is where some of these words become difficult. By him the continuance was, and the word is rum in the Hebrew. The daily was rum, and rum, the word is used to lift up and carry away. But its first meaning is to lift it up. So
lift up as in to
exalt.
Exalt. Oh, okay, so you do mean that.
So, but it also has the meaning of taken away, and the shade of meaning is important. It's very important because it needs both aspects of that meaning. To lift it up and carry it away. That's what it's doing.
So exalt first and then to take away.
Yeah, it exalts the principle of the daily, but its seat and its power and its authority of the daily are taken away. Okay? So, and the place of his sanctuary, the word there for sanctuary is mikdash, which just means a sacred place. The place of his sanctuary was cast down. And so there is a big divide on this particular verse as to what his sanctuary means. And because you have the Prince of the Host, yea, he magnified himself to the Prince of the Host, and by him the daily, if you leave the word sacrifice in there, was taken away, and the place of his sanctuary, many people believe this is Christ, his sanctuary was cast to the ground. Now, where was Christ's sanctuary? In heaven. So here we have a problem if we go down that particular path. Did Rome hire a spaceship, travel to heaven, jackhammer the foundations of heaven and throw it to the ground? Well, that would be a literal understanding of it, wouldn't it? Rome can't reach heaven. So if this is the interpretation...
But they did remove or burn down Jerusalem.
They did burn Jerusalem, didn't they? So it could be that sanctuary that's being talked about.
I don't think so, but it could be.
Well, that's an option, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's an option. That the temple was destroyed.
Yes.
The place of his sanctuary.
And it was destroyed by Roman soldiers. So it's sort of possible.
Yeah, I suppose you could say that. The daily was taken away, and the place of his sanctuary was cast down. So, yep, that's another way of looking at it. In verse 12, a host was given him against the daily by reason of transgression, and it cast down the truth to the ground, and it practiced and it prospered.
That becomes a problem.
That makes that view a little bit difficult.
Yes.
A host was given him against the daily.
So it's a host as in an army, a military force. Is that
My
what-
Yeah, who-
version's got an army.
Army. Yeah, an army was given against the daily by reason of transgression. So if the daily is taken away, and this is the Jewish and this is the work of Christ, and it's cast down, why does there an army then need to come against this daily if it's already been put down?
My version says an army was given over to the horn to oppose the daily sacrifices.
An army was given over to the
Horn.
little horn to oppose the daily.
Sacrifice.
Well, the word sacrifices is added to oppose the daily. And then we get this interesting verse. Then I heard one saint speaking to another saint. So now we get some heavenly beings. Said to that certain saint which spake, how long shall be the vision concerning the daily and the transgression of desolation, to give both the sanctuary and the host to be trodden underfoot?
So there's two things here, isn't there? We're looking at the daily and then the transgression of desolation. Or in verse 12 it says, by reason of transgression, and it cast down the truth to the ground, and it practiced and prospered.
So you've got this daily, and then you've got this by reason of transgression.
Yeah, which is interpreted as the transgression of desolation.
Mm.
And Christ talked about that.
When you therefore shall see the abomination of desolation stand in the holy place.
Yes.
So, and it says in the book of Luke, when you see the Roman armies,
Yes.
so the abomination of desolation is connected to Rome.
Mm.
It's certainly connected to that. If you find yourself getting a little bit lost with this,
Oh, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Bring it down in the corner, right?
So I'm sitting quietly.
then
You've got to think about it first.
it's all right, because it's like, and if you're feeling a little bit of inertia or a little bit of whoa, then you're just coming into an area that has been a massive battleground within Adventism for many decades.
It's
Over
sort
a
of been,
century.
it's been over though,
Yeah.
hasn't it?
It's not an issue anymore for most people, but
It should be though.
It should be, and
You mean it's just subsided?
Because they've settled in the wrong
They've
place.
settled on a
really.
wrong decision.
Oh, okay.
they've settled on a wrong decision. Yeah, and this is where it gets interesting. And now let's read a little bit of history. Well, let's discuss a little bit of history because I haven't got it to read. Well, I do have. We can read a little bit of Uriah Smith. Find what is the daily? Okay, page 164 of the less accurate version of Daniel Revelation. So
It's the revised version.
it's the revised version. It's been doctored a little bit, but it still has a lot of truth in it. We have proof in verse 13 that sacrifice is the wrong word to be supplied in connection with the word daily. If the taking away of the daily sacrifice of the Jewish service is here meant, as some suppose, which sacrifice was at a certain point of time taken away, there would be no propriety in the question, how long shall be the vision concerning it? And this is the point, because this question that the angel is asking tests our understanding of the gospel and how we understand the covenants. Because it says, how long shall be the vision concerning the daily and the transgression of desolation, to give both the sanctuary and the host to be trodden underfoot? Now, if this question is if this little horn power is Antiochus Epiphanes, and it's a literal 2,300 days, which is 1,150 evening, evening morning, you're twisting it around to make it about 3 years, then it was all over by 160 BC. It was all finished before the cross. So it doesn't challenge you. But if you believe in the year-date principle, and you believe that the 2,300 days goes from 457 BC right through to 1844, you've got this nearly 500-year period before the cross, and you've got an 1800-year period after the cross, and it's both of those periods are being addressed with one question. How long shall be the vision concerning the daily and the transgression of desolation, to give both the sanctuary, covering this whole period, and the host, covering this whole period, to be trodden underfoot. And that surfaces a tremendous amount of...
Because that's addressing what we looked at in Revelation 12. That's in the stars and the host. And we didn't get to it, but the serpent casting out of his mouth water like a flood. All of that's included in that.
That's all connecting into Daniel.
Yeah.
It's the same thing about the persecution of God's people, the 1260-year period, which it mentions in Daniel 7. But, okay, the question is, how long shall be the vision concerning it? The question evidently implies that those agents or events to which the vision relates occupy a series of years. Continuance of time is the central idea. So this is the heart of Adventism now. How long is this activity going to be taking place, where you have this daily attacking God's people and this transgression of desolation, this attacking going on? How long is this activity going to be taking place? This is the question.
Because what you've seen by asking that question is Rome, which is the transgression of desolation, we all understand that, wasn't in place back
When
at
Daniel
457.
wasn't there. 168,
but something was there, which is here.
which is described in this vision, which brings us back to the ram and the he-goat and the little horn. These are all part of a continuance, all part of a process. In Isaiah it talks about your continual transgression, your continual rebellion against me. So the word tamid, which is the word for daily, can be used for the continual sacrifices, but it also can be used for continual transgression, continual resistance. Okay? So, back to this point, the whole time of the vision is filled with what here is called the daily and the transgression of desolation. Hence, the daily cannot be the daily sacrifice of the Jews, for when the time came for it to be taken away, the action occupied but an instant of time when the veil of the temple was rent in twain at the crucifixion of Christ. It must denote something which extends over a period of years. So, because he's asking the question, how long? Well, it's not like, well, when he didn't say, when does that happen? He said, how long? Which means it's got to cover a period of time. The word here, rendered daily, occurs in the Old Testament 102 times according to the Hebrew Concordance. In the great majority of instances, it is rendered continual or continually. The idea of sacrifice is not attached to the word at all, nor is there any word in the text which signifies sacrifice. That is a supplied word. The translators put in that word which their understanding of the text seems to demand. They evidently entertain an erroneous view that the sacrifice of the Jews not being referred they evidently entertain an erroneous view, the sacrifices of the Jews not being referred to at all, but it appears to be more in accordance with both the construction and the context to suppose that the word daily refers to a desolating power like the transgression of desolation with which it is connected. And here's the point. Then we have two desolating powers which for a long period oppress or desolate the church. This is the main point, that the word daily is referring to a desolating power against God's people, which is then taken up, lifted up, embraced, while taking away its seat and its power, it takes over and continues to do the work that the former one did, but in a greater measure.
Any ideas now?
For a second, you just
It's
repeat
starting
that.
to flow.
Daily is equal to the desolating
So it's
power
there's
against
this
God's
continuance gets exalted, but then taken away by the next one that comes in and is exalted. It gets taken away, and the next one comes in, and that's the how long factor. Like it's just a continuing
and this is where we come back within the vision, where you have the ram replaced, which is a pagan power, replaced by Greece, which is a pagan power.
Well, is it the
Which is-
iron Rome,
Which is then replaced by...
the legs, and then it's the feet thing?
Yep. The legs, which is
Yes.
so what replaced Greece
Rome.
was Rome pagan.
Pagan Rome, and then it was
So you got the three pagan powers all together,
pagan Rome, and then
and then when during the time of Rome, you have this transition up until the 530s, where a host was given against the daily. The barbarian tribes converted to Catholicism. They sacked Rome. They took away its sanctuary, its power, its seat, and its authority, and all of that power was transferred to the papacy, which became the transgression of desolation. And it continued to persecute and attack God's people. Does that make sense?
so because it's saying, how long shall the vision concerning the daily sacrifice and the transgression of desolation, there's two time periods, so rather than... So it's
That's
sort
one
of like-
time
One
period.
time
It's
period,
Two,
but
two
it's different.
desolating
So
powers.
There's a desolation in the
it's
the daily
it's
thing.
almost the same power. It just has this metaphor and metamorphosis, and becomes something else.
So as Gavin was saying, it's exalted but then carried away,
Yeah.
and then it's continued on.
It takes the principle of paganism, the principle of self-worship, the principle of self-exaltation. It sheds its exterior, which was paganism, and it clothes itself, sits in the temple of God, claiming to be God in a Christian garment.
when all the
Image to the beast.
pagan things came in, and
America.
America will continue to do that work.
Will continue to do that.
but it was all like the statues that, well, this was
Yeah,
whatever God.
Yeah.
Well, no, actually,
The
it's
pantheon.
Yeah.
was brought in. And so this is the pioneer understanding, and it's so important that your understanding of the daily and the transgression of desolation cover this period. So you have 1844, you have the cross, and you have 457 BC.
So the daily doesn't really mean daily something. It's just
It means continual.
sequential.
It's basically the wrong word.
Yes, thank
The
you.
daily
that's what I
just
was looking
keeps
for.
throwing us the
Yeah,
wrong
Yeah,
yeah,
direction.
yeah. The word daily, the word tamid just means continual. And
Well, we still use it though. I do this daily.
yeah, it's continual. And you could even, like when you,
The ongoing.
ongoing,
Yeah.
if you read the Hebrew, it says how long, you could read it, how long the vision, which is chazon, how long the vision, the continuance,
Ongoing.
the transgression of desolation. It could even be read as the continuance of the transgression of desolation.
Well, the ongoing is Gavin said. The ongoing.
But the whole point of it is this continual power that is against God's people that continues for this whole time period. Okay? And the question is how long does this desolating power, and it's under 2,300 days, then shall a sanctuary be cleansed.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Just to go back to those words after the transgression of desolation, to give both the sanctuary and the host to be trodden underfoot.
Okay, that's
We
the
missed that bit.
That's the question. That's the question. Now, what's interesting is that in this passage you have two sanctuaries,
Yes.
two hosts.
Yeah, because and you've got one little horn pat.
One little horn, but you've got two sanctuaries, two hosts. Because there's the host that was given to the little horn against the daily, and then there was the persecution of the host. So there's two hosts, two sanctuaries, and Jane Andrews in his little book on the 2300 days in the sanctuary, he goes through all of these things very, very clearly.
So we're saying it's a good host and a bad host, and a good sanctuary and a bad sanctuary?
Yes.
Right,
Well,
okay.
yeah, God's.
Just to make it very simple and
Yeah.
black and white.
So, because the desolation is occurring to give both the sanctuary and the host to be trodden underfoot. Okay? So it's... And again, we're working from the standpoint as Adventists. We believe that the 2300 days extends until 1844 based on the year-day principle, based on Daniel 9 and Daniel 8 being connected together, etc., etc., etc. So I'm assuming that part of the prophecy for us. So it's got to continue all the way across here. And let's just read a little bit more from Uriah Smith. Then we have two desolating powers. Literally the text may be rendered, how long shall be the vision concerning the continuance and the transgression of desolation? The word desolation being related to both continuance and transgression, as though it were expressed in full. Thus, the continuance of desolation and the transgression of desolation. So he talks about two desolating powers. Okay? This is what Uriah Smith taught, this is what S.N. Haskell taught, this is what Jane Loughborough taught, Jane Andrews, James White, William Miller, Joshua Himes, Josiah Litch. This is what they all taught concerning
Without this
this.
understanding, we wouldn't have understood the midnight cry in 1844.
Did it fall into a hole after that or something or other?
So, the history of this is very, very interesting. The man that introduced a new view and published it in 1901 was L.R. Conradi, where he introduced the daily as being the heavenly ministry of Christ, which the little horn attacked. Now, the ministry of Christ is under siege in this chapter, but not in the context. And this is where it gets very complex. It gets confusing in your head because it's what he's saying is true, but he's applying it to the wrong parts of the passage. And that's tremendously confusing. Okay? So, and I've had to read this both way, back and forth, many times, and hang on a minute, I've got to... So, but we just need to get to a point where we can summarise this. So, when it says, yea, he magnified himself even to the prince of the host, and by him the daily is taken away, most Adventists... Verse 11.
Thank you.
He magnified himself even to the prince of the host, and by him the daily is taken away. In an Adventist context, we believe that Christ ascended into the sanctuary in heaven, and he began his work in the holy place. Now, the little horn power, by his system of priests and prelates and the forgiveness of sins, they taught people to confess their sins to the priest, which then obscured the work of Jesus in the holy place. And this is the taking away of the daily ministration of Christ. And this is what the church...
This is the current...
This is the current teaching.
Current, correct? Or current?
No, the current...
This is the current, you decide, but this is the current
I'm gonna
teaching.
help here.
This is the current teaching that the daily...
It's so much simpler to understand.
But
Even if it's applied wrong, it's still easy to understand.
That the daily was taken away when Rome obscured the ministration of Christ in heaven.
Right, okay.
Now the first question is...
And that hardly began in 457.
Bingo.
Say that again?
I said, and that hardly began in 457. The how long? It's
So
going to be
when-
from what beginning to end, not just halfway along for a moment.
Oh,
That's
so
what
it's
you
not
mentioned
just
before.
from the cross, which is what we've been saying, what the current view is.
So when did Rome begin to obscure the work of Christ ministering on our behalf? When did they begin to do that?
Centuries.
325 within the about Trinity?
Centuries, yeah.
Are you chucking in a bit more info
Centuries
there?
after the crucifixion.
Well, that is the annihilation of the mediator.
Yes.
By the 3-in-1, it destroys the mediator.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, that's the foundation, but it wasn't long from there that it wasn't really until we could say the late 400s, 538 we can definitely say.
Yeah.
By then it's definitely done.
538, there's definitely an obscuring of the ministration of Christ. We can definitely say that by that stage. But then you've got the daily is not being attacked or is not being attacked until 538 AD. That's 1,000 years. What do you mean, how long?
So what's the time frame from there to 1844?
From here,
Yeah.
it's the 1300.
1360.
1350.
It's 1300.
1306.
Yeah, 1306. 1306 years. 1306 versus what? 980, 90 something. So over half the time period there's no. So, but that's with an idea of the daily being the ministration of Christ. Now, if the daily is the daily sacrifices of the Jews, then we have Antiochus Epiphanes, which in 164 was it? 164 to 161, he's interrupted the sacrifices of the Jews in Jerusalem. He stopped. He went in and sacrificed a pig on the altar. He stopped their sacrifices. And so the daily ministration was interrupted by this Grecian power. And this is what all of the Protestant churches believed is the fulfilling of the daily. Now, if the question how long, at least for Adventists, doesn't begin until here, you open the door for another understanding here.
Doesn't cover the whole period.
Because remember, this prophecy of the little horn, it's starting with Greece, and then out of one of those horns comes this little horn, and Antiochus Epiphanes fits within that framework. So by pushing the understanding of the daily down to there, you open a vulnerability to actually saying the primary fulfillment is Antiochus Epiphanes, and this is only a secondary fulfillment. And I assure you, several Adventist scholars and leaders flushed down the toilet on exactly that point.
You mean forward?
Yes. So, because they understood the consistency, and this was the thing that Desmond Ford said. He said, you haven't got this daily operating until here. All this stuff going on here is nothing to do with all of this. So what did Ford do? Well, he did the logical thing, and he gets rid of
I
1844.
was going to say he got rid of everything.
Yeah.
No,
Because the whole concept of a continuation of a continuation of something for the whole time period no longer existed.
And it all comes down to your interpretation of these verses we're looking at tonight.
Which means, if you want to hang on to 1844, you're going to have to fight pretty hard to make sure you understand, hang on a minute, can I defend what I believe? Now, against most people, it's not going to be a problem. But there are people out there, and if you happen to get put in a courtroom and they happen to know a little bit about this kind of stuff, you're going to get nailed to the wall on this issue. And I mean, like, I've wrestled with this for 20 years, groping around, looking for answers, trying to connect the pieces together. So hopefully I can at least share what I've found and to show you why it's important. And so anyway, now let's add a little bit of inspiration. All of the pioneers in the Millerite movement, the Midnight Cry, believed that 457 BC to 1844 was two desolating powers, both attacking God's people and God's sanctuary. That's what they believed. Now, I want us to read something in Early Writings, page 74.
Could you say it was like one started and then it continued, like not two opposing or two getting together, but one starting it and then just progressing onwards?
Exactly.
It's almost like
building
passing the baton.
Yeah, it passed the baton, because the daily was lifted up and taken away. So in Revelation 13 it says that the dragon gave him his seat, his power and great authority. The authority of Rome was handed over to the papacy. And that's the daily handing over its power to the transgression of desolation.
Even its gods were handed over. Like Peter is Jupiter, isn't it?
Yes,
Yeah.
all the statues that they have. And, yeah.
I mean, that's just one example. But if you go looking through all of their cathedrals, you've got all the sun discs, it's all there.
Now, are you all familiar with? Are you all familiar with the 1843 chart? There's a chart called the 1843 chart, and it had all the figures on it of Daniel 2, Daniel 7, Daniel 8, and it was seen as a fulfillment of prophecy by our pioneers of Habakkuk 2:2-3. Set the prophecy on tables that he that readeth it may run. Now on that chart is a description of the daily as the desolating power of Rome, as a pagan power. So the daily is the pagan power of Rome. That's on that chart. And then the transgression of desolation is the papal power. This is on that chart.
Litchfield was the one, was it Litchfield that made up that chart?
Josiah Litch, I think it was Litch, yeah.
Yes. Josiah Litch.
Now,
Early writing.
early writings, page 74. I'm reading partway down. I have seen that the 1843 chart was directed by the hand of the Lord, and that it should not be altered. Really? Not be altered. The chart should not be altered. So they had an understanding of the daily as paganism. It was written on the chart. Shouldn't be altered. Really? Is that what she's saying? And it was directed by the hand of the Lord. It should not be altered. That the figures were as he wanted them. That his hand was over and hid a mistake in some of the figures. What was the mistake in the 1843 chart? They included a 0 year, which needed to come out. It needed to go 1 BC to 1 AD. Once they pulled that out, it went 1844 rather than 1843, and that affected some of the figures in their calculation. So it was a mistake, not some mistakes. There was a mistake. Because then if they say, some mistakes, well, then there's other things that are wrong. No, there was a mistake. Now, she says, then I saw in relation to the daily that the word sacrifice was supplied by man's wisdom and does not belong in the text. And the Lord gave the correct view of it to those who gave the judgment hour cry. Well, there you have it. Ellen White says that God gave the correct view of the daily to the pioneers. When union existed before 1844, nearly all were united on the correct view of the daily. But the confusion since 1844, other views have been embraced, and darkness and confusion have followed. Now, when she originally wrote this, that was the end of the paragraph, and the next sentence was actually part of a new paragraph. And she says in other places where she says, I also saw that time has not been a test since 1844. But when you read it here, it says time has not been a test since 1844. Many people interpret that to mean that everything she was talking about the daily only had to do with no more time prophecy, as in from 1844, no more time setting, no more. It has nothing to do with paganism, it has nothing. But when you go in a little bit deeper, she's saying, I also saw that time is no longer a test since 1844. So, Ellen White was shown that God gave the correct view of the daily to the pioneers. Now, in 1901, L.I. Conradi comes out with this new view of the daily of the little horn attacking the ministration of Jesus in the heavenly sanctuary, beginning primarily around 538 AD, and that this is the view of the daily. L.I. Conradi was the most bitter opponent of the 1888 message. Is that a man that you think would be entrusted with great light? Maybe. He went out of the message completely. And what is interesting about this view of the daily, of course, is that, and a lot of people don't understand this, but L.I. Conradi was in England. He was the conference president in Europe. And when E.J. Wagner went over to England to work in England, he came in contact with Conradi, and he and Conradi working together Wagner became convinced that Conradi was right about the daily. And I think Prescott was over there as well, and he got convinced as well.
And Jones.
And then, lo and behold, they're talking to Jones in 1905. Jones comes out with his book Consecrated Way to Christian Perfection, and it's full of this new view of the daily.
And after that, it took off. And everywhere Prescott went, it just took off.
And S.N. Haskell got very upset about this. And he pulled out early writings. He said, this is what the prophet says. You know, you need to back down. A.G. Daniels became very excited about this new view of the daily. Prescott and Daniels were trying to push this new view through. It's wonderful to discover when the pioneers are wrong and you've found something to prove that they're wrong and you're superior to them. Well, they found it, apparently. Ellen White in manuscript release, and I've got it written in Return of Elijah.
Weren't Prescott and Daniel the one that pushed the Trinity?
Prescott definitely. By 1938, he had embraced that view. Now, let me read you. This is on page 162. At this stage in our experience, we are not to have our minds drawn away from the special light given us to consider at the important gathering of our conference. And there was Brother Daniels, whose mind the enemy was working. Who was working Daniel's mind? And your mind and Elder Prescott's mind were being worked by angels that were expelled from heaven. Satan's work was to divert your minds, that jots and tittles should be brought in which the Lord did not inspire you to bring in. And I was shown from the first that the Lord had given neither Elder Daniel nor Prescott the burden for this work. Should Satan's wiles be brought in, should this daily be such a great matter as to be brought in to confuse minds and hinder the advancement of the work at this important period of time, it should not. Whatever may be, this subject should not be introduced, for the spirit that would be brought in would be forbidding, and Lucifer is watching your every movement. You had no moral right to blaze out as you did on the subject of the daily and suppose your influence would decide the question.
Where's that quoted from? Like,
Manuscript, 20 manuscript release, page 17 to 22.
What page is that?
162.
162 in Return of Elijah. Now, Ellen White was concerned about two things. Because the denomination nearly split in 1910 over this question. A lot of people don't know that. It just nearly completely shattered on this question of the daily, because this is fighting for the 1844. And lo and behold, when I get to seminary in the 1990s, almost none of the lecturers believe in 1844. Why? Because of the heavenly view of the daily. Because they're smart enough to work out that once it's no longer how long, it's not a continual period of time, and this doesn't make any sense anymore.
So even though it seems to be exalting our view of Christ's ministry in the sanctuary, it's actually completely unravelling us. That's why it's very deceptive.
That's Machiavelli.
That sounds similar to the other principle we've looked at way back when last year. By exalting,
yes,
actually tearing
exactly.
down.
It's the same mind.
Yeah.
It's exalting, lifting up the work of Christ, and it's absolutely ripping the guts out of Adventist foundations. And it's destroying 1844. There's an article by a man called Dennis Hokamar, who wrote a blistering attack on 1844. And he comprehensively showed that the new view of the daily renders 1844 utterly useless.
So 1840, this new theory of the daily is the raised up straw man that they bashed to like heck, to get rid of 1844. And they go, see, we did it.
Yeah. And Conradi gave up 1844.
Yeah.
E.J. Wagner gave up 1844.
Mm.
They all embraced this.
So if giving up 1844, then what was the great disappointment? What was that? Like going...
A bunch of nutty people that made a big mistake.
But
That's what I was taught at college.
But that's not the only thing they're destroying, are they?
No.
That's not the only thing. They're
It-
destroying the ministry from the holy place into the most holy place. That's no longer required.
Well, and this is connected to the fact of, and I need to read, and just hold that point, because I need to read you one more thing, because in order to get this heavenly view of the daily, you have to do something to the text.
Yes.
This is the point. When it says the place of his sanctuary was cast down, this language must be figurative language. It's spiritualized language. Now, there's nothing wrong with using a spiritual interpretation if it cannot fit any other way. But if it can fit in literal language, you should take the literal first. That's what Miller's Rules is all about. Take the literal first, only apply a spiritual application if you can't find anything literal, and then the Bible has to interpret what that spiritual interpretation is. So, and I've got it on 163. I've got Daniel 8 listed with the two views and showing where the points are. So I'll just take the time to read it for you. 163. And pagan Rome waxed great even to the host of heaven, and he cast down some of the host, literal people, the God's people, and of the stars, literal leaders, to the ground and stamped upon them. Literal. He literally persecuted them. Yea, pagan Rome magnified himself even to the prince of the host, killed Christ on the cross, and by him, by pagan Rome, the daily was taken away literally, not spiritually. Because the taking away of the daily, you cannot say that Rome stopped the ministry of Christ.
No.
No.
He never did.
He obscured it, but he didn't.
He obscured it, but he didn't take it away. But the language is to lift up,
And
so-
take away.
to lift it up and then take it away. This in no way can apply to the ministry of Christ, because it never literally happened. It's only a poetic, metaphorical, symbolic ishism. It's only rubbery. Was taken away, and the place Rome of his Rome sanctuary was cast down. Rome's temple was destroyed, the barbarian tribes came down, the host that was given against the daily came in and ripped Rome apart. It literally happened. This is the pioneer understanding. But in the heavenly view, it says, the papacy magnified himself to the prince of the host, as in he said he's like God. From him, Christ, the daily, his continual ministry was taken away, spiritual and metaphorical, but not in reality. And this is the seed. This is the seed that this teaching introduced into Adventism, was a spiritual methodology.
That's where it began. It began here, didn't it?
Because Kellogg's introduction, there was a two-pronged attack on the Adventist church. There was one prong from Kellogg, bringing in the Trinity, but there was another prong coming in at the same time, which was the daily. And they both hit at the same time. And the church rebuffed Kellogg, and they thought, oh, we've beat this spiritualism, and then got smacked with the daily from the other side. And this is what Ellen White is saying here at the end of this passage. She says in this chapter that Daniels and Prescott need to be, it says, Elder Daniels and Prescott both need reconversion. So why are these men, they are pushing really hard on this new view of the daily, they're unconverted men, their minds are being worked by Satan. That doesn't bode very well for that teaching, does it? I mean, it's a bit of a problem. And so a strange work has come in. And then she says, yes, it would be while their minds were thus absorbed, I was shown that Brother Daniels and Brother Prescott were weaving into their experience sentiments of a spiritualistic appearance and drawing our people to beautiful sentiments that would deceive, if possible, the very elect. spiritualistic sentiments, beautiful sentiments about the ministration of Christ in the heavenly sanctuary. It's deadly poison. Deadly poison.
So what year was that? Did you say?
1901.
This was 1909, 1910.
10,
1910.
Was still around and still
So
working.
it's like standing on the branch of the tree, sawing it off, and you're on the outside
Yeah.
part.
Yeah, that's what we've done.
Basically, eh?
Because 1901 was when they had one of their conferences, wasn't it? The General Conference.
General Conference.
They reorganised.
Because theoretically, yeah, raising up the sanctuary, but taking away the 1844, which is
Yeah.
the
So
sanctuary.
you're pulling out the pins. And the fruit.
And they were not at all aware of it. That, like, even my father's generation, they were locked onto that view. Absolutely. And they saw that explained and held the sanctuary. And even Adrian, for many years, that's the only way that you could see it.
This is how I used to teach it. Was this view, because that's what I'd been taught, that's what I'd studied, and I taught this new view of the daily.
So if all those pioneers, as Ellen White said, all those pioneer names were right, how did it disappear into such a big ditch? Like, how did they all...
Slowly but surely.
1980 Jones and Prescott
1901,
and
1905.
Daniels,
Wagner.
it just
The influences.
the influence. It just the church just did it, and there's only a few that were out the other way, like Haskell
And Willie White accepted it.
yeah.
Except the
So if
wrong
the son
one.
of the prophet accepts it, it must be right.
Because, I mean, the 1888 thing, yes, there's a lot of people that I believe now, but I know that I've heard about it and read about it and stuff, and there seems to be, you know, to my way of thinking, people have heard about it and follow and see the blessing like what Ellen White said, but this one, it seems to have been, there was a lot of pioneers, as she says, and, you know...
It was very clear.
Yes, very clear, and then it just seems to have, like, big ditch disappeared and...
It's just covered up.
Because again, it seems like it's upholding the message that we have. It seems to be upholding Christ's ministry in the heavenly sanctuary.
Yeah. As long as you have a firm belief in the spirit of prophecy, you're going to hang on to 1844.
Yeah, I was going to say that.
Okay? But if you start to get wavering doubts about the spirit of prophecy, and then you start digging and you start looking around and you start questioning our pioneers on a greater scale, you're moving towards a precipice. And it's like a ticking time bomb. And people that are not as familiar with the foundations of our faith, they don't dig down deep enough to even engage this question. They don't bother with it, and they just accept that 1844 is valid. And so they're not going to be bothered by this daily question. In that sense, it's not going to trouble those people. But if someone can come to you with a question that suddenly you can't answer, which this new view of the daily, like, well, okay, you say that Ellen White says this, but how long? I mean, your daily doesn't start until you get here. I mean, you've got all this period where it doesn't apply. I mean, so you're basing your belief on Ellen White. Is that what you're doing? I mean, what are you going to say then? I mean, that's where it's like, hey, it's like, well, Ellen White said it's 1844.
So, with that also, if you look in Daniel, go back into Daniel 12 and verse 11.
Chapter 12 or verse
Chapter 12 and verse 11 and 12 and 13. How do you explain these verses?
Exactly.
You explain these verses to me up with the current view of the daily.
Something to be shown again too. These ones,
From the time
From the time the daily shall be taken away, and the abomination that makes desolate set up, there shall be 1,290 days. So, what's that talking about?
So isn't the 1290 from the beginning?
1798. You've got the 12, from 538 to 1798 is 1260. Pioneer Understanding, 508 to 1798 is 1290.
Yep.
What happened in 508? Clovis, king of the Franks, ceases to be a pagan and then becomes the first son of the Catholic Church, who's baptized, becomes a Roman Catholic. So the daily then is taken away. The power then, Rome now has the power to put down its enemies that are opposing it, to take control, because this barbarian horde is now giving the papacy what it needs to put down this daily. Now, so we can understand in 508 that Clovis, being a pagan, converting to Catholicism and supporting Rome, that is a transfer from paganism to Catholicism. That fits 508. Now, if the daily is Christ's ministration, what does Christ's ministration have to do with 508 BC, AD? What connection does it have? It's got no connection at all.
No.
So, and I distinctly remember this when I had the Heavenly View of the Daily, and someone came to me and they said, well, what have you got the 1290 in there for? And it's like, Clovis, that was a pagan. It's like, oh, so I just took that off.
But it's not finished.
Oh, hang on.
we got a few more verses to go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's how I dealt with it a number of years ago. I just took it away, and I just said, oh well, it doesn't fit, doesn't matter, because I believe in 1844. But now you're ripping out part of the framework, because that leaves 1798 with only one prophetic time period rather than two that are connecting to that date.
Because current Adventism cannot explain these verses. They are absolutely, you can't explain them.
Well, they try.
They try, but they
Put them up here
Yeah, exactly.
in literal days.
Yeah, I got a friend that's in exactly that boat.
But that's also against the prophets, and time, as we understand in Revelation 10, time ceases.
So then we got 13.
So then you've got
508 to 13 brings you to 1843. Blessed is he that comes unto the 1335, because that was when the seventh month movement began.
But this was a validation to these men as they came across these prophecies that where they were and what was going on, God was leading them.
What's the seventh month movement
Se-
again in
Seventh month,
Cry.
in
the seventh month movement is the midnight cry. Go ye, behold the bridegroom cometh, go ye out to meet him. And the year 1843, which is March 1843 to March 1844, those people who survived that disappointment went into that 7 month period, the 7 months leading up to the midnight cry of the announcing of Christ going in, or that Christ was about to come, as they understood at that particular time. Ellen White says that nothing matched to her experience, that 7 month movement. Nothing matched it. That period, the joy and the spirit that she experienced. So, blessed is he that comes under the 1335, but that's connected to a date of a pagan king becoming part of the transgression of desolation, which only fits with an understanding of the daily, where daily is paganism. If you change it to this view, that 1335 no longer has any validity. So the 1335, which in the 1335 and the 1290 are the anchor points that connect the 1260 to the 2300 days. They're the second witness, so they're locking down the whole system and giving you two witnesses at every point. You rip all that framework out, then the 1260 stands alone. It's got no support, it's not connected to 1844, it's not connected to 457. And as the pioneers taught it...
And it's not connected to the 2300?
No, it's not connected to this. So you're just pulling out pins here, pulling out pieces there, just pulling them out piece by piece, and then you just have to blow on it, and the whole thing just falls over. That's what happens. And that's why, as I said, almost none of the lecturers I had at college believed in this system. They didn't believe in it. They didn't believe in 1844. For what our pioneers taught was in 1844. They believed that it was the uprising of the Advent movement, and it foretold that this movement would arise. But as for a work of Jesus in the heavenly sanctuary at that particular time, nothing happened in 1844 in heaven. And as I was told, how would you know? Were you there? Did you go there? Arrogance.
My goodness, were any of us there for creation either?
So,
They don't believe that either.
That's a statement.
no, they don't. A lot of them don't believe that either. So, and that's part of that spiritualism, the not literal reading. So, can you see how? Can you see how something so small and seemingly insignificant suddenly is destroying your whole framework and the whole platform of your understanding of the Adventist message? Boom! It's just gone. It's the boy with his little finger in the dike. It's just a little hole.
Mm.
It's not very big. It doesn't matter if it keeps leaking. That thing's going to blow you down. It's going to blow the whole thing away. If you follow it through to its logical conclusion.
Boy, the devil's a runner, isn't he?
But if you don't study these things and you don't look at it, it's just a rotting corpse waiting to be exhumed.
But Mrs. White tells us, when she's laying over the past 50 years, not one thing needs to be changed.
No.
The foundation was laid properly.
This is the foundation. It was laid properly. The 1843 chart was just as God wanted it. This is the way it was. This is the way the pioneers understood it. No wonder, Haskell was worked up, and part of the reason why Ellen White told them, this is not a vital point, is because it was dragging men like Haskell into aggression as well. They were getting really upset, and she was saying, calm down, calm down. And because she was saying calm down, they say, see, all she was interested in that we don't get aggressive about it. But she didn't say that. She didn't say in here that Haskell was having his mind worked by evil spirits. She was saying you should leave it alone. She's gently saying to them. She's not trying to settle the question doctrinally herself. She's just trying to say, leave it alone. There's nothing wrong with it. Don't touch it. Just leave it the way it is. That's what she's trying to say to them. The foundation's fine, but she's the prophet. She can't dictate scriptural interpretation. She can't say, no, you're wrong on this. It's not her position to do that. She can only guide and say, let's just, stick with what the pioneers were teaching. And that's, if you read it carefully, that's what she's trying to say. So, this is a critical point. And if you want to read more on this, there's a little booklet by Robert Wieland.
It's very cool.
Called Have We Followed Cunningly Devised Fables? I highly recommend it. Have we followed cunningly devised fables?
That could incorporate more than one particular thing, I would have thought, at this moment in time.
Now, this is the reason why this issue.
Greg's got everything.
He's a fountain of knowledge, Craig, isn't he?
The reason why this issue is a sleeper, the reason why this issue is not like, what, how could this be such a big deal, is because it's many layers down deep. And because most people don't study the book of Daniel and Revelation enough, they don't know enough about the history, their belief in the spirit of prophecy is enough to hold them on the date 1844, and so they don't worry about it. But there's cracks in their armour, because when the blowtorch is applied, your method of interpretation, which is open to spiritualism, and your inability to defend why this time period should exist, how long, as Uriah Smith was saying, will come under pressure when you are called upon to defend it. And that's when your system will give way. That's when it will buckle under the pressure. And that's what Satan wants. He wants you to believe that you have safety and security and that you're anchored in 1844, solid as you can be now. But when he applies the blowtorch, suddenly you've got, I didn't realise, I didn't know. And then you're in trouble. Like you want to know this stuff now. You want to be anchored now. And there's many other arguments. And as I say, I wrestled with this for years, and just the meaning of the Hebrew words and back and forth, and Daniel 11 and Daniel 12 and the dates, and it's swimming around in your head, and I'm going, and Satan's telling you, don't worry about it. What are you getting so worked? It's such a minor point. Ellen White said, don't worry about it. I'm going, no, I have to know. I have to understand this. I need to understand this. And so most people will, as I say, it's not a big deal, Adrian. Well, the prophet said, the Lord gave the correct view of the daily to the pioneers. It must be important. And if William, and this is the thing, what William Miller's interpretation of the daily was a completely new teaching. It had never been introduced into Protestantism ever before. What did the Protestants believe the daily was? They believed, Calvin believed, Zwingli believed, they all believed that the daily was Antiochus Epiphanes and the sacrifices that are applied here between 164 and 160. That was the standard Protestant teaching. And then Miller comes up with this brand new view of the daily as paganism, completely different. But that is what allowed him to get to 1844, and that's how he could answer the challenges of the how long, because it's preposterous, this concept of 1844. It's not so, unless you have the correct view of the daily. Then this all makes complete sense. It all fits together. It all harmonises together. So I hope that encourages you to dig a little deeper.
So, how's the covenants time?
That was the
thinking,
intro.
Yeah.
Okay, so now we're clear on the intro. Sort of.
Do you want to go a little bit further? Or are you a bit fried?
Yeah, I think that's enough.
Yeah, I was going to say,
I'm
Craig's
going.
probably ready to go swimming.
I think you're
the
having
rest of
fun
the
over
day.
here. I'm watching you have a lot of fun right now.
Yeah.
Laughing. And I'm thinking,
You've got to throw them some
drowning
floaties,
here.
Craig.
Yes, give us the reason.
But you need to read that little book, and also F.L. Sharp's. It's a good book.
I can email them to you.
Yeah.
I've got them. F.L. Sharp's Antiochus or Rome. And it's just important to at least have. Sorry.
Just going to make a statement. I've been through so many different Daniel seminars and were presented by some. If I haven't been to 20, I haven't been to any. And this is the first time the daily has been explained. The daily has never been explained.
I've
That
never
is a
heard
bad
it explained at all. I've never heard it mentioned.
And the Adventist Church nearly split in half in 1910 over this issue.
I've never heard it mentioned. The first time I ever heard it mentioned was in the Return of Elijah, and I asked you about it. What is this?
Yeah. Well, Wyland, he brought it out to us when he came here talking about righteousness by faith. And that's all he gave was that little book. It was a thought paper. And I tell you what, it just went, huh? And the lights were on. And Blair and ourselves and a few others, we caught it. But most others, it just went by.
And I came back to it. Sorry, Gavin. Yeah.
No, you're right. No, I read that stuff, and it's coming back when I was a teenager. Like I said, that was the first book other than the Bible that I bought, and I went through. I did the Daniel course, I did the Revelation course, and all that. Yeah, but it's been whitewashed with this other stuff over the years. Yeah. And
you get a blending of the two, and then there's confusion, and because I taught the other view for so long, it was like riding a bike, that's reverse. I kept on going the other way and kept on trying to ride the bike the other way. And it took me a long time to get to this position. But because A.T. Jones accepted the new view, and Willie White accepted it, and Prescott accepted it, it is a holy grail. If you touch this thing, you're bad. You're just bad news, because you're not agreeing with the messenger of the 1888 message. You're not agreeing with the son of the prophet. You're not agreeing with the General Conference president. What are you going to do then?
It's the same now with the Trinity. It gets to a point where it's locked in and you can't challenge it.
Yeah. So, it's taken me a while to get to the realization of how serious this point is. But, I can share this kind of information in this context because I know that you're open to that. But if if you share it with most people, it's like, what are you talking about? Just like, no, it's just.
Maybe the church didn't split in 1910, but it certainly split when Ford came.
Yeah, well, Ford was the natural fruit of 1910, because Froome picked it up, went into questions on doctrine, and then Ford, and this is the thing, Ford was consistent. He was simply consistently following what Froome and questions on doctrine. And then when the fruit came, the church didn't want it. But Ford was honest to questions on doctrine. He was simply following what they was teaching. And this is the thing, the men that have been logically consistent to that teaching and now have apostatized, and it's a great horror, but who created the monster? It was questions on doctrine. It was 1910, it was L.I. Conradi, it was A.T. Jones, it was E.J. Wagner. They all embraced this view. And in 1916, with E.J. Wagner's confession, when he died in 1916, he didn't believe in this date anymore. Why? The Daily. Because these men were smart. They could make the connections. They understood all the implications. And if the Daily was the heavenly ministry of Christ, then this thing's dead. It's finished. They were smart enough to get that. Whereas most people don't make those connections and don't understand. And as soon as these men lost their confidence in the spirit of prophecy, that was it. It was over. Gone. So, the issue of the covenants, just to whet your appetite, is the fact that this period of how long covers both before and after the cross. And so that then brings into you, and you've got the Holy One says, how long shall be the vision concerning the day of the transgression, to give both the sanctuary and the host to be trodden underfoot. It doesn't say sanctuaries. It doesn't say, how long is one sanctuary? And then when Jesus comes in, it just says the word sanctuary, which means it has, in that question there is an inference. It's the same thing all the way through, which infers an everlasting covenant that existed before the cross in 457 BC, right through until after the cross. And it's on this particular point that I do have a bone to pick with Mr. Uriah Smith.
Sure.
Well, maybe I shouldn't pick it with him. Well, no, I should, because he was told. He was told by the prophet, you're wrong.
Well, see, all that natural symmetry is the continuation of the Daniel statue, that pagan Rome to papal Rome, the continuation of the 2300 and the continuation of one covenant. So there's this, to my way of thinking, simplicity that they all...
Simplicity.
The simplicity, I always come back to...
Consistency.
It has to be, for a child to understand, and there's this simplicity of it continuing and being the same. I think daily I should just cross out and put continuing or ongoing or something, or take away.
Yeah.
The word sacrifice.
Yeah, don't even go to sacrifice, just that doesn't exist anymore.
And notice this, like when Ellen White says the word sacrifice was supplied and shouldn't be in the text, well, if the daily is the ministration of Jesus, isn't that an application of his blood which comes from sacrifice? So then would the word sacrifice necessarily interfere with the meaning of the text?
No.
No, it doesn't. So why did God tell her the word sacrifice has been added and shouldn't be in the text? Because it has nothing to do with what the word daily means. That's why. But the ministration of Jesus has everything to do with the sacrifice that he did, because he's applying his blood in the holy place.
Because it actually, by doing that, it's actually doing exactly what the text is saying. It's actually putting paganism, or taking paganism out and putting Christ in a place where paganism is.
It's paganising his ministry. And let me just add a little divine pattern thing for you. Where we've talked about the principle of the God of this world versus, which is the oppositional process, and the God's divine pattern of source and channel. Now, if we take the new view of the daily is in opposition with the transgression of desolation. So you're operating on this kind of a pattern. That's the signature that exists between the daily and the transgression of desolation. In the pagan view, you have a source, which is paganism, and it gives birth to a channel, which is the transgression of desolation.
Yep.
Because authority was granted to this power and this system to do this. And
Well,
so
it tells us in Revelation, you got a seat from the dragon.
there's this pattern, source channel. Because it's God's power God allows this to take place. He has to write the check to allow these powers to do what they're doing, even though he doesn't agree with what they're doing. Without his power, none of this can exist.
So transgression of desolation is just a description word of the papal power?
Yes.
Yes.
And daily is the description of
Pagan.
Medo-Persia, Greece, Rome, pagan. And F.L. Sharp does a really good thing of the sacrifices of paganism being called the daily. It's the pagan sacrifices.
Oh, so you're not just saying pagan as in the legs like pagan Rome going to papal Rome, but
No.
actually from the head all the way down.
Or at least in Daniel 8 from the neck all the way down. But yeah, from Daniel 7 it's from the head all the way
Because you've
down.
got the ram and the goat.
Yeah.
There's a Greece, Medo-Persia, Greece.
Medo-Persia, Greece. So technically, yeah, from Daniel 2, yeah, it's the head. Daniel 8, it's from the neck down. So this is the other thing that interests me is that you've got that signature versus this signature.
Yeah.
As to where this is coming from. That's interesting to me. And so I just thought I would mention that. Now I'll just as a teaser, I'll read to you this in terms of before and after the cross about something that Uriah Smith said, and this will get us thinking. This is page 184 of the 1944 edition of Daniel Revelation, and I want you to think about the subject of forgiveness, whether it's figurative or literal. As through the typical sacrifices of old, the sins of the people were transferred in figure by the priests to the earthly sanctuary where those priests ministered. So the sins of the people were transferred how? In figure, which means were they actually transferred?
No.
It's figurative. And then so there's a figurative transfer of sins occurring in the Old Testament. So ever since Christ ascended to be our intercessor in the presence of his Father, the sins of all those who sincerely seek pardon through him are transferred in fact to the heavenly sanctuary. So since the cross, our sins are transferred in fact. Before the cross, their sins are transferred in figure. That's a problem, isn't it?
Yeah, change.
Big problem.
Because what happens to their sins? In fact,
They're not really forgiven.
they don't go anywhere. They're not forgiven. This is the great covenant problem that is being uncovered when I began to read it. Listen, as I go on, whether Christ ministers for us in the heavenly holy places with his own blood literally, or only by virtue of merits, we need not stop to inquire. Suffice it to say that his blood has been shed, and through that remission of sins is obtained in fact, which was only obtained in figure through the blood of calves and goats in the former administration.
It's there all the way through, not just when he's talking in the covenants. He's bringing it through
It's all through. It's all through here.
Okay, you have to read that.
The implication is that
They weren't really forgiven.
they weren't really forgiven. They were only forgiven in symbol.
They're in a different dispensation in his mind.
And this is why we come to the issue of the sanctuary. In the Old Testament, and this is why we have to just look at this question. When someone slew the lamb, does the blood of bulls and goats bring forgiveness of sin?
No, it doesn't cleanse the conscience.
if the person didn't slay that lamb, could they have forgiveness of sins?
No.
No.
No, good.
So the lamb is a channel. It has no virtue in itself. It is a channel for them to take hold of salvation in the heavenly sanctuary, where they could obtain forgiveness of sins and the purging of sin and the cleansing of the conscience. But it had to come from heaven through the channel. Because the only way you could obtain power to overcome sin is from Christ mediating his grace in heaven. Okay? Does that make sense?
So that's the blood. So he's saying that we say it's factual that Christ is in heaven forgiving our sins, but it's really figurative.
No, he's saying before the cross it was only figurative.
Before the cross,
Yeah.
Uriah Smith is saying this is only figurative. Figurative forgiveness, literal forgiveness. This is what we call dispensational. Type, anti-type.
Yeah.
But this is creating two gospels.
Yes.
And you can see why in some ways Wagner and them flipped out that way, with Uriah Smith and them holding.
So how do you make it one gospel then?
We'll have to come back to that next week.
Same time.
Hooked you. Start doing some research on forgiveness in the Old Testament. You can the Feast of Tabernacles in 1 Kings chapter 9. There's a lot of clues in there about forgiveness, how they obtained forgiveness. When they would look towards the sanctuary, they knew who was in heaven. They knew forgiveness came from heaven, but he placed his presence and his heart in the earthly sanctuary. And this is where the source channel principle becomes so critical, that the channel is never, in and of itself, has virtue in and of itself. It's a channel through which the source, the invisible source, comes through. So that people in the Old Testament had access to the same power, the same grace, the same forgiveness, the same victory as we have today. Because they could say, I believe in the death of the coming Messiah, and receive the same power as us looking back saying, I believe in the death of the Messiah that came, and we receive the same power to live a victorious life. So the only difference could be in terms of the actual deed itself is the promise to die enabled, as it were, God to take out a huge loan, which then he could dispense the cash to buy or to pay. And then when the deed was completed, then it was fully owned. And it was fully sealed. It was to seal up the vision of the Most Holy. But the thing is, it was an issue of cash flow, that the cash could continue to be dispensed. The promise guaranteed that the cash could keep flowing.
Based on the lamb slain from the foundation.
From the lamb slain
Yeah.
from the foundation of the world. There's the promissory note.
It's there, it's there.
The promise to
That's
pay.
it.
It's a promise.
Yeah.
And I was like, the money we carry, that's promise to pay. Based on, do we have a gold standard still? No.
Based on the God standard.
So it hinges on the lamb slain from the foundation of the world.
Yes.
Okay.
Promise to pay. Which means they can have actual forgiveness.
Because it's not just the physical sacrifice of Christ in the middle, but it's the foundation of the world.
And that's the only way you can have one gospel, and it's the only way to... How long shall be the vision concerning the sanctuary? Because the sanctuary of the Melchizedek priesthood, thou art a priest forever after the order of Melchizedek, that system had to be operating right through this situation.
Long.
I'm just trying to make a link to connect those things. The point is, there's got to be sameness across, before and after the cross. There's got to be some level of sameness to this thing, because it didn't say sanctuaries.
No.
Well, Galatians, from studying Galatians, it has to be one gospel. So.
Yeah. You didn't preach any other gospel. That which was preached to Abraham, The gospel for seeing you justified the heathen through faith preached before the gospel to Abraham. So, let's pray. just thank you for the opportunity to study your word. Lots of things that we've discussed. Help us to build on a firm foundation, believing all the things that you've said under the prophets. And what you said through the prophet is that you gave the correct view of the daily to our pioneers. And this would set up a correct foundation for an understanding of the covenants and forgiveness, salvation through the cross of Christ from the foundation of the world. Lord, help us to understand these things, to connect these things. There's a lot of pieces that we've discussed, and I pray that we will not be discouraged but determined to take this as an opportunity to make our calling and election sure, to anchor ourselves in the Advent message, that we will never be moved from the saints, the faith once delivered to the saints. And we thank you, Father, in Jesus' name. Amen.